Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea here, and welcome to Future Grind. We're going to be talking about something that's been getting a lot of attention recently, and it's something that I've personally been fascinated by for a while now, and that is sensory deprivation tanks. You may have heard of them referred to as isolation tanks or float tanks, but they're all pretty much the same thing. An environment designed so you can't see, hear, smell, or feel anything. And they've been getting a lot of mentions in popular culture, including on the Joe Rogan podcast and in television shows such as Fringe and, more recently, Stranger Things. Our guest on this episode is Dave Levity. He's the owner of Levity, a highly rated float studio in Pittsburgh, and that's where I went for my first experience. So let's go there now. This is Future Grind. We are here in the great room at Levity. So, David, let the people know who you are.
Sure. My name is Dave Levity. I am the owner of Levity.
And what is it that we do here?
Sensory deprivation and floating. It's 10 inches of water with 1,200 pounds of medical grade Epsom salt dissolved in it, raising the density to the point where the body floats on top. The water is warmed to 93.5 degrees outside temperature of your skin. So after a few minutes, you can't tell where your skin starts and the water starts. The body just dissipates into the water like a packet of Kool-Aid. You float like a cork on top of water. It's one of the most relaxing things you could do for yourself.
Yeah, that description, just hearing it makes it sound like such an amazing experience. But this has a lot of different names. Sensory deprivation, isolation, float tanks. Do you find that they all mean something slightly different, or does one term describe it better than the others?
I tell you what, I always like the term floating. I don't know if floating actually does it justice, but it's a lot kinder and softer than sensory deprivation. It's kind of scary. Isolation tank is kind of scary, I feel, and it doesn't convey the experience well. So floating's cute, fluffy, you know what I mean? Like floating on a cloud, people get that.
Float, got it. So what started this journey for you? How did you get into all of this?
Sure. At the time, my wife and I were living in the D.C. area, and just the hustle and bustle down there never really had a good way to decompress. And like all great ideas in my life, it came from my wife. She said, let's go float. I thought she was crazy. I thought it was just too woo-woo for me. But we went and did it, booked our appointments, and the first time I did it, I stepped out of the tank, and gosh, I have to be honest, the world felt kinder and softer. I wasn't dealing with a lot of the anxieties that I was before, and just felt lighter. My soul, my mind felt clear, and I was still skeptical, right? Like, you can have one, like one's good, but the more and more we did it and traveled around, I just kept getting better and better. So circumstance brought us back home here to Pittsburgh, and I thought, gosh, what's better than sharing something that helps people feel good about themselves? So we just started working and putting together a team, and Levity was created from that.
Yeah, I think your initial skepticism there is probably where a lot of my audience is at. We hear claims about flotation helping to treat mental illness or chronic pain, or even some really fantastic, even supernatural claims. And I know that turns a lot of people off of this type of thing, and I think that's understandable. The woo factor that goes on.
Yeah.
So, as a former skeptic yourself, what convinced you that there are tangible benefits to this? Has there been research that you had read, or just your personal experience? Well, what did it for you?
The research with floating is a little spotty. It just really is. No one has really dedicated funds to do legit research. Coming from a background of academia, I understand the stringency of testing and what needs to be done, and it hasn't quite been done with floating. There is some smaller scale studies that show that it helps with PTSD. There are studies that show the breakdown of lactic acid helping recovery for athletes, even stop smoking, retriggering the mind, retraining the mind and the thought process, but no large-scale studies that would really feel comfortable standing on. All small-scale studies. So for me, I was very skeptical, man. I am of the same mind. Like, if I can't see it and you can't show me the numbers, I'm not into it. But after the first handful of times I did it, I came to the realization, I don't know how my iPhone works either, but it works. And I knew how I felt when I stepped out and how I felt for the next couple days. And there's something there. And I think we live in a world where a lot of people like the numbers and like to see it black and white, which I'm part of that tribe as well. But in this day and age, sometimes we just shouldn't question things and just enjoy them. But it was the feeling. It was a validating feeling. The more and more it was done, the better and better it felt. And for me, it was, like I said, just amazing. And that's what we've seen through our guests, too.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great reviews of it helping various people in various ways. And even if the science isn't necessarily there, I'm all for people who are able to feel better using whatever method they want. I mean, at the end of the day, many of these benefits could be placebo effect, but even if that were the case, it seems to be working for some people regardless, so that's great.
Right on. And that's where it's like, scientifically looking at it, breaking it down, the magnesium in the Epsom salt. Magnesium is a wonderful element for sleep. It's a building block for endorphins. There are things there, but why does it need question? If it makes you feel good, physically, that zero gravity on the body, you feel great. And then even psychologically, to be alone with your thoughts for an hour, you kind of hear that small voice in the back of your head and what it's saying, and if it's good or if it's bad, if it's helpful, if it's detrimental. It allows you to kind of rewrite that code.
Absolutely, and you use the metaphor rewriting the code there. I think that's how many biohackers and transhumanists would look at this. I mean, humans are a biological machine, and I'm open to any kind of tweaks we can use to rewrite that code, as you say. I know that might sound kind of science fiction-y, but speaking of science fiction, that's one way many people end up hearing about float tanks in the first place. They were featured on the television show Fringe, and more recently on Stranger Things, so the pop culture awareness is certainly growing. And people like Joe Rogan are definitely adding to that popularity as well. With all of these portrayals, do you have anyone who comes in expecting this to be very sci-fi-like? Do people ever attempt to do things like lucid dreaming or out-of-body experiences, or any of the extreme things that sensory deprivation is sometimes associated with?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's awesome. We see so many different people that have heard different experiences, whether it be from Joe Rogan to Stranger Things. They come in, I always try to temper expectations a little bit. Like the first time you're in there, you're probably not going to see dragons and fireworks, but you're still going to feel good. And the experiences that people have are very unique to them. And it runs a gamut from, a lady who prayed for an hour and referenced her feeling very close to a greater being of God, to those that just say, I had a real rough day in the office today, and I just need to be alone for a minute. It's almost like a couch fort. And some that come in and they just have a beautiful mind, man, that experience different things that maybe I'm not wired for and I can't see, but they do. And we get a lot of just different experiences. So it's always interesting.
So it sounds like some of the benefits are universal despite what your particular goals are, which is good. But not everyone enters the tank in the same state of mind. I mean, when neuroscientist John C. Lilly was experimenting with these tanks to explore human consciousness, that sometimes included psychoactive drugs like LSD. Even today, people like Joe Rogan have discussed using marijuana in conjunction with flotation. And we're here in Pennsylvania, where medical marijuana was recently legalized.
Yay! Thank you, Pennsylvania, right? Coming into the 21st century.
Absolutely. So what are your thoughts on some of this? Is there any merit to the accounts of people like Joe Rogan who augment their consciousness in other ways in addition to the tank?
Yeah, I mean, cannabis is a wonderful complement for a lot of the things that ail people, that struggle with. I mean, we host people living with fibromyalgia, arthritis, a lot of things that are supported by research that cannabis helps. I spent time in Colorado with float centers out there, and what they're doing is pairing the cannabis industry with floating, which I think is very interesting. So it's one of those things that as Pennsylvania evolves and we see how this plays out, I think it's definitely a supplemental thing that could pair well with floating. But it's such a fringe thing right now that it still has negative stigma about it, which science disproves, but Pennsylvania's pretty much behind in that arena. But yeah, I mean, it definitely supplements well.
And marijuana isn't even the only drug that is claimed to treat health problems that flotation might help as well. You have psilocybin and other psychedelic compounds that have been used in research on PTSD, which some people use flotation for. Do you find that some people come here strictly for the mental health benefits?
Yeah. A large one is anxiety and depression. And looking at the research and how our minds are wired, everything is processed in a fight or flight. And what that is a little jab at our central nervous system, a little spike. So a lot of people are walking around and feeling like they're anxious. I don't know if that's quite anxiety or your central nervous system has been jacked by how many notifications we have, how many buzzes, beeps, dings, and we see a lot of people that live in an anxious state, that when they float and they come out, they feel better. We host a lot of people that struggle with depression. The one situation that comes to mind, the girl said she came out and always asked kind of like, how was your experience? How is everything okay? And she talked about being alone and hearing that little voice of how she was talking to herself. And she said she didn't realize how mean she was being to herself. Always saying, I'll never be enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. People don't like me. People will laugh at me. And what was really interesting is she said, alone with those thoughts, she was able to almost bully them and push back on that of, wait a minute, I am a good person. I do the right thing. I help others. I am kind. I have friends. So the PTSD one, we also see people for that too. And I think that's a lot of the decompression of the central nervous system, that you're just so amped up all the time to get in the tank, to shut off all the stimuli coming in and allow the mind to exhale, to just be in peace for an hour, to allow the body and mind to decompress. Those beautiful people come out, and a lot of them are those that have that's either served or are serving our country. It's a wonderful tool for them, and I'm glad we host them. I'm flattered and humbled that we host them.
Yeah, I love that. We have a big problem in this country with stigma and mental health treatment, and I'm all for anything that can help, because it's clear that something needs to be done. Switching gears a bit, I think that some people in my audience might be confused about why we're doing an episode on sensory deprivation. I'm someone who is interested in sensory augmentation. I want to see more and hear more and feel more. It seems almost antithetical to my goals to go into a sensory deprivation tank. But interestingly, many people report heightened senses and perception when they emerge from the tank. Have you noticed this? What have been some of the takeaways for you?
Probably the appreciation of the senses. It is essentially kinking the sensory input hose for an hour and then releasing it. When you come back out, food tastes better, everything smells better, the lights are brighter. It's an enhancement when you close it off for an hour and then open up that hose. It's an enhancement. Words feel heavy. There's a enhancement of everything around you and an appreciation, even how you move, how the body moves. When you come out of the tank and how you feel, it's like, oh man, I didn't realize how much energy it took to move this meat wagon around. So it's absolutely an enhancement tool, but you almost have to go through that deprivation stage to appreciate the normal world.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I can totally see how that would heighten your perception and awareness, especially of minor details that you would typically overlook. And floating seems to be related to a lot of other things. It seems like it might work well when paired with other services, perhaps a massage therapist, a spa, a gym, a dispensary. Are there any plans to add any of that here to Levity? What do you think of floating being paired with other wellness-related businesses?
I think they can relate, but I think alone in and of itself, floating is better alone, just for environmental reasons. The experience when you come into our studio, everything's curated to make you feel comfortable. And if someone's lifting in the corner or throwing weights around, it kind of takes it away. The salons and the spas, I know that, definitely support them. Massage people, body workers, love them. But I believe when floating stands alone by itself, it validates it more. Some of the places I've seen pair even cryotherapy with floating, I just feel like it becomes a supplement instead of the main course. Whereas by itself, it's beautiful. And sometimes in society, we try to add too much, and it gets muddled. We lose a bit. It's spread too thin. And for us, it was like, focus on what we know. Focus on the floating. Give people a great experience with that. And if they want, the massage and stuff, there's plenty of other places like that. But the wellness and the mindset of all those are very similar.
I can definitely see what you mean by a curated experience. This is a very calming atmosphere, and you keep that going throughout, which is really great. I can definitely see that floating is the focus here, and that's what the whole experience is built around.
Thank you.
But how often would you recommend that people would float for, the minimum effective dose? What's a good schedule?
Oh, gosh, I would say probably twice a month is a real sweet spot. And as we offer memberships, we start at 1, 2, and 4. Everybody that starts at 1 generally bumps up to 2. And you see a trajectory that once a month is great, twice a month is better. You just clear out the mental browser of the garbage that we store from day-to-day stuff of, Nancy down at accounting who was mean to us. It's still there. It's still pegged in there. And if you have to wait a month to clear that out, then that's taking up disk space, right? Like, you have the ability to clear it out. And twice a month is weird because, we see the trajectory of people personally and professionally steepen when they start coming twice a month. And whether it's just the timing, what have you, but that seems like the very sweet spot.
And what about duration? I've seen an hour, 90 minutes, and I've even heard of some marathon times of 5 hours or more. Are these arbitrary lengths, or is there some reasoning here?
I tell you what, I cap it at 90 minutes. I am very, very ADHD. And after 90 minutes, it's time to get out and it's time to do things. If you spend 90 minutes alone with your thoughts, you're going to come out with new ideas. You're going to be excited. You're going to want to email these people, write this blog, or read this, or listen to this podcast. And 90 minutes has been the longest I've been in the tank. But we have folks who love 2 hours, who swear by 2 hours. We generally start people at an hour because they feel and assume that it will be a long time alone with their thoughts. But we accommodate 90, we accommodate 2 hours. If someone did float around the idea of 3 hours, totally open to it. If that's the experience they want, we accommodate and we make sure it's a good experience. But for me, 90 is the cap. I get fidgety after 90. I want to go do things. I'm a doer. So while it's a great tool for me, 90 is the cap.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. So let's say I'm a rookie coming in for my first time to learn about floating and give it a shot. What's my experience like here at Levity? What happens?
We design the studio based on levels. Like when you enter our great room here, there's a huge epic barn door made by John Malicki. He just killed it in design. And what we wanted was a clear separation from the real world to what happens behind that barn door. And as you enter into the great room, it's a nice open room, a lot of ideas, a lot of meetings are held. And as you transition back, it's quieter. It's almost like a second level removed from the world. We have a nice art gallery. Always like to share with first-time guests how the water's cleaned. our filtration systems, and then we lead into the room. And the rooms are designed around natural elements. I spent a lot of time in different spots where it was almost sterile environments, and that is not the path. It is not the path. When you enter the float rooms, you can feel there's a natural feel there. The stone-in shower, the teak shower pans that John made for us, and the water, and it's just making it a nice urban retreat away from the world, hidden here in Squirrel Hill. And then, man, that shower, you take that first shower and get in, close that door, and it's an environment unique into of itself. To kind of project what others would experience is beyond me, because everyone is unique. But when you get in there, you are so many levels away from the hustle and bustle of Murray Avenue, of the city of Pittsburgh, of your life, of your title, of whatever your W-2 says, whatever your life is going on. It's such a retreat that for an hour, you are truly alone. And then it works in reverse after you come out. That shower afterwards, you feel every droplet of water. You transition back into the great room. You hang out for a few minutes, and you start to appreciate all of the senses, all of the things that are going on in the world. So it's a nice little, escape, I guess.
So you said there that you like to explain the water filtration process. I think that's probably a big concern for a lot of people, and rightfully so. So let's set some minds at ease here. How do you clean the water?
Oh, man, I went nuts with the filtration. I was emailing everybody. Anybody that would talk to me, anybody that would listen, I was asking questions. It wasn't an area I felt confident in, so like I said, I was just reaching out to everyone. And what we created is a 3-tier process to cleaning the water. The first step is like a big gray silo, and it has 175 square feet of filter area down to 10 microns that the water passes through. Behind it is a UV light that blasts anything that's thinking of growing. The third is we use food grade hydrogen peroxide in the water, 80 to 100 parts per million. On top of that, cleanliness is the most important thing to me. As I visited other studios and just found out there were levels and standards of cleanliness, and so for me it was so important. Our pumps are graded to 70 gallons per minute. We run them for 12 minutes. There's 220 gallons of water, so all the water is turned over multiple times, goes through that system. On top of that, we also. It was kind of interesting. Someone said it the other day when I was sharing about the filtration with them. And they said, well, the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because nothing can grow in there. And I thought, very interesting. And they were like, well, aren't you doing it overkill? And I thought, well, cleanliness and overkill pair well together. On top of that, I get in there and wipe down everything, the roof, the walls, everything with hydrogen peroxide, all the touch points. But the water filtration was so important because for us, that's our inventory. That's kind of our stock. So it was like I was emailing dudes at SeaWorld, like, yo, how do you clean salt water, right? How the hell? Like, I have no clue. And everybody was so welcoming and open to like, this is what you do. Buy this, do this, and you won't even. And we have them hooked up to Wi-Fi, so they run in the middle of the night. They refresh themselves all the time. And that was very important to me.
That's really reassuring for sure, and I have no complaints. Everything I've seen so far has been super clean.
Yeah, we filter the water before it even goes in. I'm like, that's just my bag.
Good to hear. You mentioned the art. You have some impressive stuff on the walls here, and it really adds to the experience. What's the story behind that?
It's been an interesting thing that it's almost like a lightning rod for creatives. The local artist, his name is Phil Seth, whose work we're displaying now, came in and floated a few times and then was asked, hey, can I do some artwork for you? You never quite know, right? Like, okay, sure, man. He floated and came out and did the butterfly and talked about going into the tank and feeling like a caterpillar and then going through this process and emerging as a butterfly and seeing the universe and being able to get outside of his body and think. And was like, geez Louise, what a diamond, right? Man, fill our gallery, bro. Like, whatever you want to do. And so for us, before that, we had just by our tribe and network, someone came through and like, hey, can I do photos for you? Yeah, absolutely. Found that floating is a wonderful thing, not only for those on the 9 to 5 grind, but the creatives that are stuck within their head all day. And they just want to express themselves. So for us, it's a blessing that, and I just feel so grateful that they want their work on our walls. And how thankful we are to have their beautiful work and their unique work there. So it's been helpful. It's been helpful.
And it's not just the art community here in Pittsburgh. This is a growing city with universities and increasing population of young professionals working in fields like technology and robotics and healthcare and startups. Was that considered at all? Why here? Why Pittsburgh?
Interesting you say that, because when we started, the people we were talking to were so downtrodden on Pittsburgh of like, people won't get this. And I just believed in the vision. I knew what I was seeing around me, and seeing the renaissance that's happening here in Pittsburgh, and seeing how many smart people that work so hard, whether it be in technology, whether it be as an entrepreneur in small business, whether it just be, on a 9 to 5 grind. Pittsburgh is the place, man. That entrepreneurial spirit is here. You feel it. When you look around and you open your eyes and you wake up and look at the things that are happening in this city, from the culinary scene to the art world to the businesses that are popping up, it's here, man. That is here. So when people first started saying Pittsburgh won't get it, I started examining who was saying that. And I thought, that is why they don't see. And then when I got around the right people, I started, building that team of believers, of dreamers, of people that got it. And it was like, this isn't crazy. Not only is this not crazy, this is going to be wildly successful. It's just has never been built before. And so it was a matter of recognizing at the time of growth here in Pittsburgh, people need this. People need it. An hour to just be alone with your thoughts and away from the world. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah, Pittsburgh seems like a city well suited to succeed into and even help build the future. And it sounds like floating is going to be around for that and even supporting it. And speaking of the future, what's the future have in store for Levity? What do you see as the evolution of the float industry as a whole?
I think the evolution of the float business is very interesting. It has its pros and cons, as with anything that gets popular. We see a lot more athletes, like Steph Curry, some of the Olympians that were touting it, of doing a great job. I think there is a massive amount of room for growth, but with that, there needs to be a level of education for the people that are opening these places. And a standard needs to be held, just the way of, for example, our filtration system. That's commercial grade, good for like Olympic-sized swimming pools. I've been in other places where it's like, well, that's not necessary. You're right. It may, in a residential application, but there just needs to be a standard. So I'm always interested when I hear somebody's thinking about opening a float studio, or they're opening one, and it's like, that's great. I think the more people that experience it, the better. But I'm always interested on standard being maintained, because it's so unique that if you have a poor experience, your first experience, it's not very likely that you're going to try it anywhere else. It's not like a restaurant where like, I had a bad burger down at that joint, but I bet that other one's pretty good. So I'm always interested on standard. For Levity, we'll just continue to grow and build our family here. It's all about providing a great experience for everybody that comes through the door, no matter who it is. If it's, that's, the stay-at-home mom that wants an hour away to be peace and quiet, or it's the professional athlete, or it's the actor, or it's the accountant, the electrician, whoever it is. Our vision has always been to give people an escape, and that is continue to grow.
So how does that work? Is there any kind of authority that regulates these businesses and holds a standard? Or is there any organization within the community that self-regulates?
Kind of scary, right? There isn't one. There isn't one. Which, that's why I'm always open-minded and always receptive when someone comes in and has that first question of like, how do you clean this water? That's what I was asking when I first started. There isn't a regulating body, which is somewhat scary because there are places that just have them in their homes. Maybe run by wonderful people, but you can't hold standard. There's just such a gamut, and that's why it was so important to me as we built this place, as we built Levity, to just blow it out the water. We are the standard now. We are the standard. Anything less is not to standard, and it may be okay, but just okay isn't good enough. Like anytime I hear somebody say, well, it's okay, it's just good enough, it's almost like syntax error in my brain. Like, why are you just good enough? Can't be better. And what we did is set the standard. And it was just through a lot of hard work, a lot of research, a lot of asking questions to the right people, and being honest with ourselves of like, what are the hang-ups? Why wouldn't someone come float? Why wouldn't someone try this awesome experience? We made a list, and I checked them off one by one.
So let's put you on the spot here. We had you on the podcast for about a half hour now, and I imagine anyone listening at this point that hasn't tried yet is intrigued. So what's your pitch? What would you say to convince someone to give this a try?
Oh, man, what a tough question. That's an awesome question, though, man. I would say just give it an hour. Give it an hour. I mean, how many of us, and look, I'm guilty of it too. I love to binge Netflix and just kind of like check out for an hour. Just give it an hour. Just give it an hour, and your body will feel great when you leave, when you come out. The mind will feel clear. You'll realize the things you were worried about, a lot of them don't matter. Large majority of them don't matter. And you get to focus on the things that do matter. Being a better person, being kinder to those around you, helping others out. And that's the pitch. I mean, because for me, it was always difficult. I was always asked, well, how do you sell this? And it's like, I never want to get into selling this to people, which is a weird thing as a business owner. You'll find us and you'll try it because you want to feel better. And once you do, I don't want to say you're hooked, but then you understand how good your body's designed to feel, how clear your mind can be, how carefree you can be. And I've spent an hour doing worse, right? So it's always a good idea if you can do something good for yourself, your body and mind, to give it a shot. Give it a shot.
Love it. Yeah, it's definitely worth a try. So I'll give you the last word here. Where can people find you or find out more? And are there any parting words or a message you'd like to share?
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much for coming in here. I'm really appreciative to meet you, and I love the podcast, love what you're doing, love your audience. I just love what you're doing. If they want to find us, we're floatlevity.com. On Instagram, we're Levity412. Facebook, Levity412. And our email is Levity412@gmail.com. Any questions? We're pretty snappy on responses, very open, and love to chat with everybody. So
awesome. Thank you again for inviting me in. I love the conversation and can't wait to float again.
Awesome. Thank you for coming in.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to my interview with Dave Raypatch of Levity. That interview was conducted just after I got out of the float tank, so I apologize if I sounded a little bit not with it there. But I wanted to take a second to tell you a little bit about my experience firsthand to let you know what it was really like for me in the tank. Now, these tanks have a lot of different uses, or at least alleged uses, as you heard. Everything from pain management to a tool for mental health, dealing with anxiety, depression, or PTSD. And it seems like a lot of people use it for mindfulness and meditation and just reflection, which seems like a pretty good use for it as well. But some people even report entering altered states of consciousness and compare it to a psychedelic experience. I didn't experience that, but that's not to say it can't happen. In popular culture, these tanks are often seen as a way to tap into or heighten mental abilities or even access other realms. We alluded to this earlier, but TV shows such as Fringe use a flotation tank to enter another universe, and the character Eleven in Stranger Things uses the float tank to enter the Upside Down. In my case, I wasn't attempting to go to any other universe, and I wasn't using it to treat any sort of health issue, but I was interested to see what the tank experience would be like for me. And the tank was a bit larger than I expected, which was good. It was pretty easy for me to get into it, but it was dark and slippery, so I can imagine that someone with limited mobility might need some assistance. And once I was inside, the first thing I noticed is the water. Laying in it, it felt pretty much like normal water, maybe a little bit thicker and much more slippery, but I was definitely more buoyant. I floated quite easily in it, and that definitely lived up to its goal. I've heard some people mention being a bit cold in the tanks, but I was comfortable throughout. Laying there, the first thing that stuck out to me was I couldn't tell if my hands were partially out of the water or if they were completely submerged. So I kind of had to move them a bit to find out. And not being able to tell was really interesting. So my sense of touch was certainly impacted, and that stuck out to me. One float tank experience that I had heard about and wanted to have myself was not being able to tell if your eyes were open or closed in the darkness, because it just wouldn't matter. Unfortunately, a very small bit of outside light made its way through a little opening in the door. It wasn't much light at all, but it was just enough that in the darkness, it wasn't complete darkness, which was unfortunate, and I hope that that's corrected for next time, but I do look forward to going back. As far as the other senses go, during my deep breaths, I could definitely smell something. I think it was probably the water. I don't know. It could have been the materials in the tank, but my sense of smell was probably the most active during my float. And I don't want to say that this was a bad smell, but when there's no other sensory input, it definitely is distracting a bit. So the sense of smell was the one that was picking things up during this tank experience. Another takeaway from my time in the tank was just how heavy my body seemed to be. Every small movement I made felt like it took a lot of energy, and it really made me conscious of how much work it takes to move your body around. And that's something I certainly don't think about when I'm not in the tank and I'm out in the normal world. I'm moving right now and not thinking about it at all. As I mentioned, the tank was quite large, and I fit in easily, even with my arms slightly outstretched. In the darkness in the tank, it was hard to know exactly where I was positioned relative to the edges, and I did occasionally bump up against them. This is probably because I was more fidgety than an experienced floater, so I'm guessing my next time wouldn't be as bad, and I think I probably could have done more to cut down on the bumps. They weren't overly problematic, but it did happen. I had heard from other experiences of people having visions or hearing an inner voice while in the tank. I didn't experience any of that. I was fully aware of where I was and what I was doing throughout the float. I think I wasn't completely calm in my mind. I was thinking about the interview I was going to do. I was thinking about the video I was creating. I was consciously trying to think about the experience rather than just having the experience. So I don't think I was in the perfect state of mind for this, and I would probably try to do something differently before going back, maybe doing some meditation beforehand, some breathing exercises, just something to try to be in the moment, which I think I may have missed the boat a bit on this first time. Before long, the music slowly started fading back in to signify that my hour in the tank was coming to a completion. It passed much more quickly than I expected. I didn't know what to expect as far as time frame. I didn't know if it would feel like a long time or a short time. It definitely felt pretty short to me. I've heard of other float centers in which people actually knock on the outside of the tank to let you know when it's time to get out. And I'm very happy that Levity uses music instead. I imagine that's a much nicer experience. As I sat up to exit the tank, some of the water ran down my face and into my eyes and mouth. And it's a good thing this happened at the end rather than the beginning of my float, because the water tasted pretty bad. It left a lingering, unpleasant taste in my mouth, and the salt water was pretty painful in my eyes. Let's just say taste is definitely not a sense you want to have to use in a sensory deprivation tank. I mean, it was fine. It was no big problem, but if it would have happened at the beginning of my float, it probably would have been a distraction throughout. I showered immediately after I got out of the tank, and that's a pretty important first step. Some water splashed on my phone when I got out, and it left a white residue on the screen that I had to wipe off. So I can't imagine going around throughout the day with that white residue on my skin. and it was already starting to feel kind of stiff in my hair. Upon returning to Levity's great room, there was a semi-truck going by outside and some cars, and it really was kind of shocking to me that all of this traffic was on the street, just a few dozen feet from where I was in the tank, but I was completely oblivious to all of it. So it really did a good job of separating me from the outside environment, and that was pretty impressive. So it was relaxing and enjoyable. I don't feel completely different, but I did enjoy the experience, and I felt better afterwards. I definitely look forward to doing it again, and I'm sure that next time I'll be more focused and know what to expect, which will really help me get into the right state of mind quicker and maybe get more from the experience overall. So yeah, if this sounds like something you would be interested in, I definitely suggest giving it a try. Don't expect to reach any altered states of consciousness, but if that's something that happens to you, great, and I would love to hear about it personally. So let me know what your experiences are like. I definitely suggest just taking it for what it is, a great way to tune out the distractions and obligations of the world and just refresh.
Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea again. Thank you for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Please subscribe to Future Grind on iTunes and YouTube. We have a lot of great guests coming up, and I wouldn't want you to miss anything. Also, feel free to like, share, and rate this episode to really spread the word and let people know about it. I couldn't do this without you. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Future Grind.